Chancellor Merkel, Dr. Kissinger, Minister Schmidt, members of the Bundestag, Excellencies, honored guests, and friends. Herzlich willkommen. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie.
I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this event today.
In troubled times. So did George Marshall. Looking back can sometimes help us see the present more clearly. Among its many achievements, the Marshall Plan is remembered as one of the most successful examples of a foreign assistance program. But we forget how contentious it was back in 1947. The things we remember the Marshall Plan for, among others, are that it laid the foundation for both a strong transatlantic relationship and also for European unity, two elements of our world that we have long taken for granted and are now being questioned. The Marshall Plan was inspired by a vision of an international order based on democratic systems of government, free market economies, rule of law, and rights of the individual. That order is under challenge today. We could not have two better people to help us reflect on what the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan means for our time than our two distinguished guests, Chancellor Angela Merkel and Dr. Henry Kissinger. You both capture the Marshall Plan, the spirit of the Marshall Plan, and we are deeply honored by your presence with us today. Chancellor Merkel, you have led Germany successfully through many challenges over these past 12 years, and you show us every day what it means to be a committed European and also a committed Atlanticist. Dr. Kissinger, you are a towering figure in U.S. foreign policy. And we are so delighted that because of your indebtedness to your dear friend, Dr. Guido Goldman, who is also the founder of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, that you are here today as well. Now, rather than telling all of you more about them, I want you to hear from them. So with that, let me thank our wonderful partners for the 70th anniversary event, the BMW Group, Google, the KfW Group, and the U.S. Embassy Berlin, and invite Dr. Kissinger to the stage.
Frau Bundeskanzlerin, ladies and gentlemen, in 1961, I asked former President Truman of which of its policies he was most proud. He replied, to have brought a defeated Germany back to the community of nations as an equal. He was justified in his judgment. But he did not do that job alone. Any tribute must include as well the devotion of the German people to the vision of its new democratic leaders to restore a shattered country Currencies had been devalued by inflation. Factories were closed. In the devastated cities, food shortages prevailed. A great vision is the prerequisite of a great achievement. George Marshall, who had become Secretary of State only 5 months earlier, supplied that vision. At Harvard University, he offered Europe the material means to recover the faith in its future that the war had destroyed. Marshall's speech proclaimed, above all, the end of American isolationism. It was delivered in an undramatic manner because Marshall believed in the Prussian virtue of mehr sein als scheinen. And so he pulled the speech out of his pocket and read it without looking up and without any special emphasis. Beyond its economic commitments, however, it was a clarion call of permanent commitment in the construction and maintenance of international order. And it was not America's act alone that shaped the future, because Europe responded. It rediscovered the historic political infrastructure underneath the rubble of war and built, in partnership with America, the edifice of the rules-based system of contemporary order. It produced NATO, the European Union, and the Atlantic Partnership, all intrinsically connected with each other. A globalized economy grew from these foundations. We live in a period conscious of controversies, but many of the tensions of the contemporary world are the price of success. They derive from the achievements ushered in by the Marshall Plan. So today, we have challenges not just to one region, but we have some regions of the world that are consolidating, others that are disintegrating, still others that are fluctuating in their adaptations. Instantaneous communications link them all. So today the challenge of world order concerns not one continent, but several. Not one form of instability, but simultaneous revolutions. Not the restoration of one political system, but new tasks of integrating several. But this is the price of construction. When the Marshall Plan was put forward, the emergence of the present world also seemed implausible and was highly controversial. Courageous leaders working cooperatively nevertheless brought about the European solidarity, the Atlantic Partnership. Among them, I would say signally, the Bundeskanzlerin, a respected friend of America and an inspiration to all who've had the privilege of working with her or seeing her actions. Therefore, on this occasion, I am confident that the future will honor the past that I have tried to describe here. Thank you for this opportunity.
Also vielen Dank, Dr. Kissinger.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kissinger. And now, Federal Chancellor Merkel, you have the floor.
Nur von Dr. Ladies and gentlemen, President Karen Donfried, Mr. Goldman, Mr. Kissinger, I am so delighted that you came here today and that you addressed us. And I don't know, when you said, or when we heard that you have tremendous experience, then, well, this is not even enough. Because all the representatives of the government, of the Bundestag, everybody here knows and really appreciates your wealth of experience, and that you share this with us is excellent. And this introductory quotation also said that you are an excellent contemporary witness. As hardly anyone else, you are deeply knowledgeable when it comes to the event of the times. You also understand the great differences in contrast to previous decades, and you know where there are common grounds or discrepancies. It's very important that we understand the situations to be enabled to take good action. And therefore, it is crucial that today, on the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan, we convene once again to think about what happened 70 years ago, to be able to understand and to then draw conclusions for actions today and with you to the future is necessary, especially when we now think back to the speech of the former Foreign Secretary of State George Marshall that he gave on June 5th in 1947. With his plan, he presented a reconstruction plan for Europe, and this was right after the Second World War. Let's try to remember how important this very historical moment was, how this speech and plan of Marshall impacted on a huge region. His speech and his plan was based on the conclusions that he drew from the devastating experiences after the war, with the consequences of tremendous reparations, isolation, and destruction. Based on these conclusions, he then developed his conviction that after the end of the Second World War, it needs to be done completely differently. The result was a plan which said that errors made in the past should not be repeated again. It was a plan that focused on lasting peace and prosperity. It was a plan without which Germany, Europe, and the transatlantic relationship today would look completely differently in contrast to what we know today. It was a plan which the former Secretary of State on June 5th in 1947 introduced at the Harvard University, and Henry Kissinger just said what happened at the time. There were three visionary convictions guiding his action, marking the foundation of his plan. First, Germany should be enabled to get integrated into the Western community of states. This step was not to be taken for granted because with Germany and National Socialism, with Shoah and the Second World War, tremendous suffering happened in Europe and the world. And there, ever more remarkably and ambitious, was his step to extend a hand to reconcile with Germany. But this was not the only thing he wanted. No, this was to prove how politics was to be understood on the basis of common convictions and joint values, and that it could work out to the benefit of all. To really be able to understand this whole plan and its implications, we also have to think about the overall situation in 1947. And then we understand that Marshall's Plan is inseparably linked to the question as to how the United States of America, with view to the threat of the Soviet Union and communism, cope with this and shape a future. The Marshall Plan wanted to shape a completely new kind of a transatlantic cooperation, a cooperation that should also embrace Germany, a cooperation which on both sides of the Atlantic should be rooted into joint convictions, values, and understandings. And these values and interests focused on the freedom of individual people, rule of law, the protection of every single human being, and a market economy, in Germany, the social market economy. This joint foundation was supposed to be the key for success. It is and was and remains our key to a successful transatlantic partnership. This thinking and action doesn't focus on winners and losers, which could never ever work in the long run, but it's more about balancing interests. It's really about achieving a win-win situation. And this is a mindset and action that really wants everybody to be a winner. When we stand up for our joint values and interests, we owe on both sides of the Atlantic, now for more than 70 years, and of course also in Europe for more than 25 years, the situation that we have peace and prosperity. A large contribution to this situation, of course, also has to do with the foundation of NATO. And in 1955, Germany became a member of this alliance. Taking on board Germany into this alliance was and remains crucial. It's a main pillar for our foreign and security policy. And whenever there were European transatlantic challenges after the war, also when we had asymmetric threats, changes marking different eras, changes that will go on, then still, and this is not a contradiction, NATO has to prove to be able to stand up for its values and interests in this new globalized world. Also, after the latest NATO summit in May, we know that we in Europe now face the huge challenge to understand that we also have to take into our own hands our fate. This is our responsibility. And this is something that doesn't only hold true for foreign and security policy, but also when it comes to domestic and economic policy. And this brings me to the second conviction that also forms a building block for Marshall's Plan. He was a supporter of open markets. He wanted that Europe, devastated by war, should be brought back to its feet, also in cooperation with the United States. He was convinced that a successful economic recovery and stability would lead to lasting peace and freedom. And of course, this was not an altruistic approach neither. No, at best, this also served to defend American self-interest, because Europe should be strengthened as a business partner. And George C. Marshall expected very positive impetus from a strengthened Europe also for the United States. He was convinced that good trade and a strong economy in Europe is good for American companies also. And we should not forget about this. There are numerous examples. Let's think about the different agreements also with the European Union. Protectionism, isolationism, however, impede innovation. And in the long run, this is disadvantageous for everybody, especially for those who count on isolationism, even though they use different terminology for this. I'm a supporter of open markets. For this, we need a multilateral trade system supported by the WTO with joint rules. On top of this, we need bilateral and regional trade agreements, bringing down trade barriers, respecting protective rules to the benefit of the different member states. We have an ever more globalized and interconnected world. And George C. Marshall already envisioned this at the time, because his third conviction aimed at focusing on old enemies, bringing them together thanks to closer economic ties. In 1948, this led to the organization of European Economic Cooperation. It had the aim to allocate the whole aid, to distribute it in Europe. Later, it turned into the OECD. So therefore, and rightly so, George Marshall, with his economic support, is someone who paved the way for the European economic integration. 10 years after his speech, representatives from 6 European states signed the Treaty of Rome. And we, the European heads of state and government, in March, on the 60th anniversary, commemorated this in Italy. For decades, the European Union secured peace and freedom and prosperity in an unprecedented way. And for the future also, the European Union remains a main pillar to secure peace and prosperity. This is something we should never, ever forget. We simply have to think about the numerous conflicts, tragedies, also in our European neighborhood. This is not to be taken for granted. Dear Henry Kissinger, you pointed out that the speech of Marshall paved the way for a new era in the U.S.-American foreign policy. The Americans wanted to make sure that this disaster never, ever happened again. There was too much bloodshed. And this is why the United States choose measures like this plan, which is now part of our important history, the Marshall Plan, which for the European states and Germany paved the way towards peace, safety, and prosperity. And we are deeply grateful for this. Therefore, the Marshall Plan is really one lucky stroke of our history, and it's part of our national memory. 25 years after the speech of George Marshall, we decided in Germany to found the German Marshall Fund, an organization, the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And this is why we also celebrate its anniversary today. Mr. Goldman, you also helped to establish the German Marshall Fund. And I thank you so much for your commitment in the past and in the first years. When it comes to the German-American relationship, you really made tremendous contributions to strengthen it further. Thank you. For more than 45 years now, the German Marshall Fund serves the transatlantic exchange, bringing together people, supporting mutual understanding, providing information, clarifying different positions, identifying commonalities. The German Marshall Fund is, so to say, a translator into one and the other direction. And for us Germans, it helps to understand the Americans and the American society with their spirit, their spirit of innovation, and makes them so fascinating. And also the German Marshall Funds helps the Americans to understand our country. So it really strengthens the friendship between the two countries. The German Marshall Fund made a contribution so that the transatlantic relations is now footed on a very robust foundation. I'd like to thank everybody who works for the German Marshall Fund from the bottom of my heart, and I wish you all the best for everything you do.
And now we have gifts for both Dr. Kissinger and Chancellor Merkel. But let me start just by giving a very heartfelt thank you to both Chancellor Merkel and Dr. Kissinger for making it so clear to all of us why indeed remembering the past is so relevant for today's challenges. And I do hope that all of us in this room can help live the lessons of the Marshall Plan that do remain so relevant for our world. And I'm now going to turn to Dr. Guido Goldman, the founder of GMF, who has a gift presentation for our two distinguished guests.
Thank you, and thank you for your very kind words. This will be very brief. We really are deeply appreciative of the fact that you two are here today. This is a very important occasion, and I echo what Karen said. I can't think of any two people who more appropriately should be here to honor the memory of George C. Marshall. As the Chancellor mentioned, the German Marshall Fund was created on the 25th anniversary in 1972. In a certain way, although Henry may deny this, Henry was somewhat at the very origin, because Henry at Harvard created with me, but he was the director of the German research program. That became the Center for European Studies, and it was the Center for European Studies that actually worked with the German government, and I should mention Alex Möller, to create the German Marshall Fund in 1972. What we have for you as a little memento is reflecting back on 1947, when we only had vinyl records. We didn't have all these tapes and CDs and everything. So we have remastered on vinyl the 11-minute, very short speech by George C. Marshall, a speech that at commencement, I don't know if you knew Gabe Hauge, but Gabe Hauge was in the audience and he said, I never knew what he said. It was a very calm moment in Harvard Yard, but a very profound moment across the Atlantic. And what we've done is we've remastered the tape, and then Karen Donfried found at the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau in their terrific archive a cover that we made out of a poster of the time. And we want to give that to you. And we want to also give you, we taped it closed so it wouldn't fall out, but, but we won't. And we want to thank you so much for being here. And Henry stayed on after the Kissinger Prize. I said, stay on to be able to do this ceremony, and we're so appreciative. Thank you.
So, thank you so much. And now, as you can imagine, Chancellor Merkel and Dr. Kissinger have very busy schedules. And what I'm going to ask is if all of you can remain seated just while we help the Chancellor and Dr. Kissinger exit the museum. But just a final word of thanks to both of you. I know this is an especially busy year for you, and we're all watching from interest from the other side of the Atlantic. Dr. Kissinger, it is always special to have you with us. And as Guido said, just as we remember, but also as we think about the relevance of the lessons of the Marshall Plan for our time, having both of you mark this special occasion with us will be something we all long remember. So thank you very much.